Good afternoon, my friends. This is the Grim Flayer. Hope you're all doing very well today, and I hope you are ready for more Golgari midrange, more Green-Black Rock, and Modern with a twist. This deck is called Force of Rock because we are jamming 2 copies of Force of Despair in the main deck. That is the big twist. That is the source of spice, if you will, in this deck. Otherwise, it's a very solid rock deck, but we do have 2 copies of Force, and we are building around it in a couple minor ways that are otherwise viable in their own right. So we're going to talk about this deck designed by Ian Ray, Confidant tier supporter, great all-around guy, Raybot on MTGO. This is his deck. This is for you, Ian. Hope you like this league that we're about to play with it. And before we get into the deck tech, which we're going to do 3-4 minutes breakdown of what Force brings to the table and what the shell around it is, I do, my friends, just have to show you the awesome stuff offered by the channel's first ever official sponsor, Brian Palmer at brianpalmerart.com. We've got tokens, we've got playmats. I'm showing you the stuff here. In this league, we do play Tireless Tracker, so if you're playing a list like this in paper, of course, you need some clue tokens, and these are absolutely magnificent if you ask me. And he's got a lot of other stuff that goes into a lot of other archetypes, commander decks, modern decks, you name it, anything in between. Also, we are building around Kalitas to some degree, and of course, Kalitas and Liliana the Last Hope, they're both the generals of the armies of the dead, so if you want to make your zombie armies that much more devastating for the opponent in paper, these zombie tokens that Brian offers are awesome. You get a 10% off discount code if you use my code, GrimFlayerMTG, all the relevant info in the description. So thanks to Brian for sponsoring the content, guys. Please do check that out. And let's talk about Force of Rock. Okay, so some of you may not even be fully aware of what Force of Despair does because it's not a card that really sees modern play. It is a 3-mana instant speed spell, 1 generic, double black. If it's not your turn, you may exile a black card from your hand rather than pay the spell's mana cost, so a typical Force of blank clause. Destroy all creatures that entered the battlefield this turn. So the first thing to talk about with this card is its downside. We know that sometimes your kill spells are dead, whether the opponent doesn't play to the board, or whether they just don't hit what the opponent's doing, or whether there's indestructible, or hexproof, or it's just not what you need. And it is even worse, in many ways, to play a kill spell that doesn't even catch you up if you're behind on the board when a kill spell would otherwise be great, because Force of Despair cannot kill things that have not resolved the turn you cast it. You can't catch up if you're already behind on board with Force of Despair. So that is the big glaring weakness of the card. That's more than anything else why it does not see modern play. However, this does a lot more in other situations than other cards could ever dream of. We are a very traditional deck in terms of our tempo. We play 1, 2, 3 along the curve, going up to some higher curve stuff. We don't really cheat on mana. A lot of our stuffs are mana sinks, they're mana hungry, right? So Force of Despair is uniquely tempo positive for our deck at the usual cost of card advantage. You know, your opponent plays a turn 1 creature that you want to kill right away. Well, you're going to 2-for-1 yourself with Force to get rid of it. But that's something that otherwise we would not have access to. And the idea, of course, is that with our direct advantage from cards like Tracker, or our pseudo advantage from cards like Liliana, Scavenging Ooze, whatever the best effect is in any given matchup, we can catch back up. So you use Force to stay alive in the early game, you can catch back up. And it is also a way to take care of some stuff that you might not otherwise hit, like your opponent plays a big 5-drop, you know, like a Glorybringer, or they play an 8-drop Bedlam Reveler. Well, your pushes and your decays at least can't touch that, but Force of Despair can. You can also hardcast Force if you have the mana open. Again, not the best fit in that sense. We usually are more of a tap-out deck. We can't usually afford to play a more reactive game, but there are windows where that does come up. So Force of Despair, very, very cool. The other thing I want to say about this card specifically, the OGs will remember this. People who've been watching my channel for a long time before it got as big as it is now, I covered Modern Horizon spoilers in great detail because it was the most exciting thing that's happened to Modern since its inception, really, right? And Force of Despair, I actually put as number 5 on my top 5 cards adding that would be added to Green-Black Rock from Modern Horizons. Now, I was incorrect about that. Obviously, nobody really plays this card, but In my defense, number one, I got the other four right. I think I named Unearth, Plague Man, Nurturing Peatland, and Collector Roof, which is not in the deck. Those are all now BG Rock staples. The card that should have rounded out the top 5 is Hex Drinker, but I did underrate the snake. However, another thing in my defense is that at the time, Affinity was a real deck, Hollow One was a huge deck. Force of Despair would actually be really good against both Affinity and Hollow One. And then other minor things, like the Zoo decks were more prevalent. Other Vomit Out the Hands deck, like Elves, were more prevalent. So Force of Despair, there is a time and place where it can shine. Now, let's talk about the shell. So the first and most important thing to note, 2 copies of Kalitas main deck. This guy's well-positioned. Probably not well-positioned enough to main deck 2 copies, though, to me, unless you're getting the really nice synergy between Kalitas and Force. Because, of course, the big risk with Kalitas is you've got to tap out, and then you've usually got to untap to really start getting value with him. Not with Force. If you've got the black card to pitch, you can get guaranteed value right away most times off of Kalitas. Very, very nice. And of course, in general, he's where we want to be in a lot of ways right now in the meta. Another deck building note, I didn't make a single change to this list, by the way. This is what Ian submitted, and I quite like it. This is the most controversial thing to me. It's just a little greedy on the mana, and Ian himself acknowledges this. He says he deliberately got a little bit greedy here because he's just not impressed by Quagmire these days. Not only is it slow, it's undersized, and also the Death Touch is not as relevant anymore just because we have access to Death Touch with these cards, QB and Plague Man. So to that end, he plays 2 Treetop, no Quagmire, and he also replaced the traditional Castle Lock Thwain you'd see in a list like mine with an Urborg, just to help make up for some of the missing black and another land that is unlikely, or that will not come untapped, whereas Castle is even more likely to come untapped than usual if we are leaning a little bit more into the treetops, right? So otherwise, what else does Ian say here? He's a dedicated Golgari player through thick and thin. He put Engineered Explosives back into the sideboard. I agree with him here. This is a card that I don't usually register anymore, but it's just really awesome. I'm always happy to have access to it. It does a lot these days. It hits amulets, can clear out the zombie tokens, good against Infect, Bogles, Ponza, Shadow, plays around Veil of Summer. These are all points that he has made. Otherwise, I think that's about all we really need to say. We've got a pretty teched out sideboard with a lot of 1 and 2-ofs, only leaning really overwhelmingly into what we need to do these days, which is the big mana hate. 1 Unearth, 1 Tireless Tracker, a nice core 4 of here and there. We've also got a main deck Brutality, which I never hate to see. Only 3 copies of Dark Confidant, 2 Hex Drinker, and a pretty traditional 1 Decay, 3 Trophy split. There we go, guys. So, Ian, once again, thank you for your support, my friend. Thank you to all Patreon supporters, as always, and let's... Oh, one final thing. It is donor's choice whether it is a replay or live recorded league, and Ian opted for the replay because he really likes getting into the deep analysis for a complicated decision point, while we have the luxury to kind of sit back in our chair after the fact and take our time puzzling it out, right? So that's what we're doing, and let's get right into it. Let's play a league with Force of Rock. Alright guys, strap in for round 1, game 1, because this one's a doozy, and you know we've got to keep the hand with double Force of Despair. That's what we signed up to do, right? We signed up to cast Force. We're going to cast it. And as you can see, a hand like this can leverage it fairly well, right? Opponent on the play keeping 7, and we are against my secondary archetype in Modern. Some lovely John Avon, Urza's Legacy, I think, basics from OP. Very good taste. And they go turn 1 Mountain Soulscar Mage. We have drawn another Tarmogoyf, which is one of our best cards in the matchup. I just main phase the push. Most Prowess decks do not play any kind of card that can blow out Fatal Push. But you never know, Prowess builds do vary a lot, so until I see a little more of the deck and I'm more sure that they're on a traditional build without the bad reactive cards like that, like Apostle's Blessing or whatever, I'm just going to main phase the push. Then we're going to fetch up a Swamp, we'll play a Tarmogoyf. End step, opponent has to Lava Dart, Lightning Bolt the board. This is very, very good for us, right? It's very good for us. That's like the floor for Tarmogoyf in most situations, as you get to 2 for 1 them. We're drawing more black cards. Honestly, this is fine. Another thing that would have been fine here is to play a Collective Brutality, draining for 2 and checking the hand, pitching Dark Confidant. The main thing I would really like about this is it would grow the Goyf to a 4/5. On the other hand, I said, just running out the Goyf here, totally fine, because again, in Game 1, they don't have their Dismembers in or anything. They're going to have to 2-for-1 themselves, if they even can, to get the Goyf off the field, right? So opponent's going to crack the Islet, go to their turn, play a 3rd land, and then double Burst Lightning the Goyf. So we've already 2-for-1 them twice with our Tarmogoyfs, and we draw a Forest. So another interesting spot here, we could once again Brutality aggressively, and it's again not a bad time to do so because they are kind of tapped out. We might catch something, but we might also whiff. And the opponent also has a Lava Dart in the bin. Dark Confidant's a very, very bad card in the matchup because it dies to Lava Dart, but I'm starting to get a little bit worried about Bedlam Reveler. They have 4 spells in the graveyard, meaning Reveler has, Reveler costs 4 to cast right now. They have 4 instants and sorceries, so I actually decided to play Confidant because it lets us hold up push. It also lets us present a tension between flashing back Lava Dart, which is the way to answer Confidant, and keeping the graveyard full for Reveler. Unfortunately, they have another Lava Dart in hand, so that doesn't really pay off. That said, it's not like Bob was going to do much good for us anyway. Opponent kicking it off with some Monomorphosis, whatever. Then they'll crash through, and the last cards in hand are land, Bedlam Reveler. So this is the nightmare. Reveler is the card that's really, really tough to beat for us. It's a big body, goes over the top of our traditional removal, and it, of course, refuels their hand. However, they do exactly what I was hoping they would do, and they play another creature, which is the right thing to do. They're certainly not supposed to play around Force of Despair, but we get them. We take care of Reveler and Swifty with Force of Despair. I decided to pitch Fatal Push because we want to keep the other Force around, in my view, because it's the only thing right now that can kill another Reveler. Another really interesting spot, it would be a fine spot for a Brutality, but I don't really want to pitch my Force. I also don't want to run Hex Drinker out into the Lava Dart. So if I didn't know the matchup as well, as I do, I probably would have done something there. Whatever it might be, just like if I was less experienced, maybe just run out the Hex Drinker and take the trade, or more likely probably Brutality to check the hand or something. But I know that this matchup is surprisingly contingent upon who wins the value game, right? So especially with the way this matchup went, we were at 19 until they just lava spiked us, and it's turn 6, right? So this is all about the value. So even though we kind of time walk ourselves there, I'm very content to play patiently. Now, Tireless Tracker, it's an okay draw just because it's something that I'm happier to run out into a probable death, right? Certainly more so than Hex Drinker. So opponent goes Swifty, they go Lightning Bolt. Force of Despair pitching Brutality here is not the worst, but then again, we're only taking 2, so I decide to just play it a little bit more patiently here. It is likely enough that we draw some relatively dead black cards, like discard spells, for example, would be pretty dead in this spot, so I think there's incentives to hang on to both of these cards for that reason. Blooming Marsh, an awkward draw, but I am just going to run it out. We're just kind of playing super reactively here, and here's the downside of Force is you can't just use it as a kill spell, even a clunky one in this spot, so we're just kind of doing nothing. But again, I do feel that patience is a virtue in this spot. Opponents shoving all in, and that's the one upside we had, is if we didn't present a kill spell last turn and we didn't do anything on our turn, I did think they would be likely to shove all in, which makes me want to go, okay, now's the time to Brutality, especially because we drew Field of Ruin. Opponent, I think they missed this. I don't think there's a real reason not to Lava Dart us in response to keep their Swifty alive, but they missed it, or they chose not to. But the graveyard's full enough, I don't think that's an issue, so I think they're supposed to Lava Dart there. But anyway, we do get the Swifty off the field. They say land go, and we draw Scavenging Ooze. So I was about ready to just see if they forgot about the Lava Dart long enough to get my Hex Drinker up to level 4, or to level 3, rather. But instead, Scooz is the better play here. Little awkward, little non-Bowie, our hand right now. Force is not live. And opponent top decks Bedlam Reveler for a turn, so that is pretty rough. That's what we wanted to avoid. I decided to play it a little bit safe with the Scooz. until they tap mostly out for Monomorphos. So they only have 1 mana open. We've already seen 2 copies of Lightning Bolt, so the only thing that really punishes us is if one of their 2 cards is exactly Lightning Bolt. So with Monomorphos on the stack, I do decide to try to grow to a 4/4, and those all resolve. That succeeds. So that's all good. Opponent will Monomorphos into Crash Through, into Soulscar Mage. So you could see where if we had a black card in hand, Force of Despair would be just another really nice 2-for-2. We would have had them totally tapped out, totally empty boarded. We would have gotten to untap with a Scooz and just go to town. However, sadly, Hexdrinker's Green was not able to get us there. So I did decide, the first move I made here is I tried to eat their Lava Dart. Just to make sure that Hexdrinker doesn't die to it. This clears the way for Hexy, and once again, they just let it resolve. So, fair enough with me. Now that it has resolved, I did decide to make Ooze a 5/5 and to pass holding up either 1 Ooze activation or Field of Ruin if they present a target, or just Force of Despair. Opponent is on the Runaway Steamkin build, which is one of kind of the 3 major ways to play Mono-Red Prowess. And they go Steamkin to light up the stage, so it's some pretty good action off of that Bedlam Reveler. And they light up into Mountain Reveler. So if they're on Steamkin, they're probably only on 3 Reveler. They're seeing all 3 copies in the top half of the deck. It's not ideal. It's not ideal, is it? So they can't quite cast it this turn, but they certainly will next turn. End step, we will Force of Despair just to 1-for-1 the Runaway Steamkin in a really clunky way. And then we're going to try to go for the Hexdrinker. Tarmogoyf's a pretty good draw, but right now, they're empty-handed. We know we can get the Hexy up to a 4/4. And if we had more green mana, it might have even been better to just go even harder in on the Scooz. But instead, we make a 4/4, we make a 6/6. There's no way we can eat enough spells to make Reveler uncastable. They only need 1 in there because they've got 7 lands, right? So we got to just eat the 3rd Reveler, and this is the exact type of thing they want to be doing against us. So they draw another 3. Then they have to hard cast to light up the stage. They find Lava Spike Mountain. Then they will spike us. And then they will light up again, so opponent just going totally off. They've seen 41 cards so far. They've got a Swifty and another Lava Spike waiting in the wings, and they're attacking for 6. We're at 10, so there's no way going to 4 is correct, especially against their wide board. We have no choice but to double block here. Feels bad. And see how the opponent wants to sequence, and they will kill our Scooz, leave us with Hexy, and we draw another Scooz right off the top. So not going to lie, that was an excellent, excellent draw. So that lets us just, once again, while they're tapped out, get up to a 4/4, get another bit of a life buffer, and put a level onto Hexdrinker for good measure. Now we are just sitting back behind our big green fatties that do have a great deal of inevitability if we can just extend the game. Opponent finds another land and they are just scooping. So we weathered the storm, my friends. We interacted early and often with fatal pushes, with forces of despair, with collective brutalities. We forced them to 2-for-1 themselves twice to take care of our early Tarmogoyfs, and then, admittedly, the nice top deck of another Scooz at the end of the game was very, very good, but, you know, we had another Tarmogoyf, we had Hexdrinker threatening to become level 8. We might have still gotten there anyway without Scooz, but Scooz kind of put the nail in the coffin, right? So, like I said, a really intense game 1, 13-turn grind fest. We're winning through all 3 Bedlam Revelers, which is no mean feat main deck. And what a great game, guys. This is why I built into Prowess, and this is why I built into Green Blackrock. Both decks I think are really cool, really fun to pilot, really fun to play against. So this was an epic opener to the league. And spoiler alert, we do play against Prowess more later in the league. So because of that, and because this is a matchup that deserves more consideration, I'm going to take you to a more intensive sideboarding discussion right now. Alright guys, so as I said, sideboarding is complicated here, because they're a hyper aggro deck with a really good turn 3 Goldfish potential that pressures your life total immensely. However, The way we play means that the matchup often goes really long and is often contingent on who can outvalue the other player. Like, yes, if we're totally failing to interact, they'll run us over. If they're totally failing to get their feet underneath us, we will inevitably take over. But if the game's close, it turns into a surprisingly value-oriented game. So, Dark Confidant, clearly the worst card we have. Painful, liability, dies to everything, including one half of Lava Dart. I think the first 2 copies of Thoughtseize are pretty bad, but I also think you're probably more likely than not wanting to leave 1 copy in, simply because discard effects are pretty good. They're okay. They're pretty solid. And you just have to answer Bedlam Reveler, and ideally, of course, you have to answer it before it resolves. So one way to do that is to run them out of resources, then take up with Lily to get it out of the hand. Another way to do that is to attack the graveyard with Scavenging Ooze and Nile Spellbomb. But another way to do it, admittedly, is to simply Thoughtseize it away. So I think you can afford 1 copy of Thoughtseize, but depending on your configuration, it may or not be in. I put the Inquisition over here, so these cards have to come out. These cards can come out. You might want to bring out an Inquisition instead of the Thoughtseize, or you might want to do the reverse. I do like playing exactly 1 copy of Hexdrinker. Like I said, this is some hedged siding. It's just such a liability against their burn, especially, again, Lava Dart. But if the game goes long enough, you can find a spot for it, just like we did in Game 1. That was a perfect demonstration of that. Tireless Tracker, I think you can take or leave. This is kind of a make-weight. If you have enough cards to bring in and you want to take it out, sure. If you want to leave it in, sure. I think you can go either way. And Force of Despair, you might be surprised to see me side out 1 copy of this, but again, this is not burn. This is not a pure aggro or hyper-aggro match. We do have to be conscious of the value axis. So I think leveraging exactly 1 force, but not 2 is where I want to be. Over here, we have, this is kind of the tier 1 removal and interaction and permanent category. We've got, of course, Kitchen Finks, very nice in the matchup. Collective Brutality, very nice in the matchup. Questing Beast is actually amazing here. Really a big problem for them, going both ways. Engineered Explosives, they play a critical mass of 1-drops. This is just some nice supplementary removal. Maelstrom Pulse has pretty good X for 1 potential, and of course can also kill Bedlam Revelers, which is pretty nice. Plague Engineer is not as good as I think some people think it is, but it is better against Runaway Steamkin than it is against Kiln Fiend, or the Bauble Bedlam Reveler build. Still a totally fine card. Naming human with it is totally fine. But it is a 3-drop that dies to their shocks. And finally, Nile Spellbomb. I think you probably want to play at least 1 copy of this if you have it, just because it clears out the graveyard, it grows the Goyf, and it is value positive. So you could see this is kind of a sideboard gauntlet rather than a fully sideboarded list. And I did tweak a little bit here and a little bit there, but just for the sake of something to show you, let's do something like this. I do also want to say that because we saw the Runaway Steamkin, we know they're probably not on the 4th Reveler, which makes this Thoughtseize a little bit less necessary. So that's some real nuanced stuff, though. You don't need to worry so much about that. A functional 60 against Prowess is going to look something like this. Let's go check out Game 2. And here we are for Game 2, my friends. We do have a 1-lander, which is obviously not good. But this is a keep. This is a pretty slam dunk keep in my view against Prowess. Fatal Push is one of our very best cards. With Tarmogoyf, one of our very best cards. Skooz, one of our very best cards. And then if we get up to the 3rd mana, Liliana the Veil, also one of our very best cards. And Hexdrinker on top of it, pretty nice. Opponent does not have a turn 1 play, but they're going to Burst Lightning us here so they can get a 1-mana draw 2 off of Light Up the Stage, and they find Mountain Soulscar Mage, so they are curving out, they're finding a threat. This is pretty much exactly what they want to do. End step, we will get our Painless Fetch land, and then we are going to get a Forest, partially because we want to respect our life total. That's really it more than anything else. Partially because some players will play Blood Moon against you, even though I think that's very bad. It is something that you don't want to just lose to if you can afford to help it. But the reason Blood Moon is bad is because we're already incentivized to fetch our basics, right? So, anyway, I ran out Hexdrinker. Why did I do that? Well, we could once again 2-for-1 them with a Tarmogoyf, but the problem with Soulscar Mage coming down the pipeline is they can realistically just neuter Tarmogoyf with a single burn spell. Therefore, I would rather present Hexdrinker, which is going to probably incentivize them to point something at it, which they do, and I get to Fatal Push the Soulscar Mage. So it's really totally fine to trade 2 for 2 like that, and then follow up with the Tarmogoyf, which is going to be a lot harder for them to take care of without the help of Soulscar Mage. So opponent will play a land, they'll Abrade, then they'll bolt the Goyf. Exactly as we've mentioned before, and as we've seen in round 1, the Goyf is just 2 for 1ing them, and they're not getting any prowess value along the way. We draw Blooming Marsh, which is just perfect. We tick up with Lily, we get the last card out of their hand, a 1-of value piece of Finale of Promise. Again, perfect situation for Lily. So perfect, in fact, that the opponent will scoop after their draw step. So sometimes the games go back and forth, and they don't end until you're in the teens as far as turns go, and each player has had the upper hand multiple times, and sometimes you just do that. Sometimes you just present some threats that they have to answer in a really inefficient way. You slam your Liliana, you're pretty far ahead, the opponent bricks, and that's going to do it. We had obviously a lot of really good things going for us. If they had found a creature, we could have pushed it. We had Scavenging Ooze to start taking over the game, and Unearth, crucially, to buy back the Skoos or to just buy back a Tarmogoyf. Unearth, very, very good in this matchup. Didn't need it here, though, so we cleanly 2-0 Mono-Red Prowess, a great start to the league. Force of Despair did some work in Game 1. That's what we want to see. That's what we're here to see. And so far, so good, my friends. Well, we have lost another die roll, but the hand's totally fine. We've got Fatal Push, we've got Field of Ruin, because big mana decks do exist. We've got Hexdrinker for something proactive, and Liliana, of course. Our turn 3 play of Dreams in a Game 1, and a blind Game 1. Opponent, though, goes Eldrazi Temple Pass. Possibly my least favorite land to see, and we just draw a forest, so we're already a bit flooded. Time to just run out Hexdrinker. On the end step, though, opponent's got a ton of stuff to do. They will, once upon a time, into a Thought-Knot Seer, and then they will dismember Hexy. So, some good mana efficiency from the OP. And then they will pass back to us after having deployed Urza's Tower. Not much we've got going on here. We're just going to play Verdant Catacombs, which is going to enable a Revolt for Fatal Push. I think opponent read us for that, and they're playing a little bit scared of that, because they could certainly cast the Thought Knot here if they wanted to, but they chose not to. But they do play Power Plant, so obviously we're a little bit scared of their mana in a couple different ways right now. So what do we want to do? Well, we draw Inquisition of Kozilek. It's not the best card in the matchup. It's one you probably side out to a significant degree. I think I'm going to have to hit next turn here because the client's lagging. Well, that was a pretty crappy turn to have done so. A bunch of things just happened. All right, well, let me run that back. We have fielded their Power Plant. Because I'm more afraid of Tron than I am of them powering out Eldrazi. And then, of course, we Inquisition. Opponent had a couple of responses. They once upon a time into another Thought-Knot Seer. And then they also Warping Will in response, making a Dork, which means that our Inquisition whiffs. So that was a complete disaster. Once upon a time, a pretty serious upgrade for this deck in those ways. Specifically, the ability to just be mana efficient in what should be a clunky deck this early on. The only good thing is we fielded the right land, so they have another duplicate tower. Not the very best. They could have just jammed Smasher here. Instead, they go for Thought-Knot Seer. An interesting decision, one that you can kind of understand. They then take away our Liliana, though, which I don't think is right. Obviously, Lily is wonderful in the matchup, but right now, Lily's not really doing much because they can sack this Dork. So we do manage to max punish the opponent for this, though, because we draw Tireless Tracker, letting us have a great turn of double clue, make Revolt for push your Thought-Knot Seer, and we draw Force of Despair, which would be even better here if we, of course, had a black land for it. But that's when we were thinking they were going to play Smasher. Instead, they've drawn Walking Ballista. They ping the tracker. That's actually pretty rough. So that's a really good draw for the OP. We know their hand, so we'll begin by cracking a clue. We draw Brutality. Interesting spot. So we can Thoughtseize, play a land, Brutality the Ballista. That's not bad. The other thing we can do, of course, is use Brutality as Force of Despair fuel. So I did, in the end, opt for the latter. This also is pretty nice because it's going to let us hold up Clue. So OP goes to their turn. They are going to indeed cast that Thought-Knot Seer. So in response, we force it, which means our trigger to draw resolves first, which means they get to then take away what we drew, which is a Dark Confidant. Not ideal, but then again, Bob is pretty bad in this spot. Against that Walking Ballista anyway, so it's all good. Opponent drew a land for turn, they smack us for 1. Our Clue finds us a Fatal Push, which is okay, but our draw step finds us Kalitas, which is completely amazing. So I think you can see the line here, guys. We go Kalitas, push your Ballista, make a zombie, and then I did run out the land, partially because they know about it, and partially because we've already seen our 1 of Tracker and our 1 of Brutality, which we exiled to force, so not exactly needing to slow roll the lands. And we do have a mana sink on the field, right? So that's why we run that out. Opponent's draw is a Matter of Shaper, which is one of the very most annoying cards in the deck, but Kalitas turns it into kind of a joke, which you'll love to see. So we'll attack, opponent assigns no blocks, and I like getting aggressive with the Kalitas here, gets him up out of Dismember range, and of course is just a huge life point swing in our favor. Then we play the Skoos we found for turn, which is not a bad follow-up, is it? Opponent has found more action, but it is just another Matter Reshaper. So, end step, we grow the Ooze, and we've drawn Abrupt Decay. Love to kill the Reshaper with us getting value instead of them. That is perfect. Opponent sends us a message, and as they're salting off on us, which is what happened, we execute our turn and get exactly lethal. What a feel-good moment, guys. We drew the right half of the deck here. We get Kalitas, overrunning them with value, kind of routing around their death triggers that are usually such a problem for us. Matter of Shaper is unironically one of the very best cards in the deck against us, but Kalitas, again, kind of just making that totally irrelevant. So this was a feel-good moment. We just crush Eldrazi Tron Game 1, finishing at 27 life. You love to see that. So anyway, this is still one of the very toughest matchups for our deck. We do not love to run into it, but let's go to Game 2, see what we can manage to do post-side. Okay, my friends, so Game 2 against Eldrazi Tron. We have brought in 3 Fulminator Mages, 2 copies of Plague Engineer, and 1 each of Maelstrom Pulse and Questing Beast. I think the use cases for all of those cards are pretty apparent. Maybe Plague Man looks like the worst on paper, but just the way it plays out. Specifically, I've had a lot of hilarious instances of opponent trying to make an Eldrazi Scion off of Warping Whale into a Plague Man naming Eldrazi. That's always fun, and that's always amusing, but anyway, that's what comes in, and in terms of what I sided out, Kalitas was awesome there, but I think leveraging 1 is more like where I want to be. He's just slow and clunky, and he's undersized relative to their Eldrazi until he can get going anyway. Brutality comes out. I leave out 2 copies of Inquisition, leave a 3rd in, especially on the draw, just respecting Chalice a little bit, respecting their early plays like Reshaper a little bit. Unearth can come out, and we trim a Tracker and a Skoos, just trimming the stuff that's a little bit slower or more conditional or takes a little while to get going. That's basically the idea here, while committing to more bombs and, of course, land destruction as well. Now, this was a pretty loose keep, but again, I was just thinking Force of Despair is basically what we signed up to do. It is very appealing to potentially use that to take care of a Reshaper, or not a Reshaper, a Smasher as cleanly as possible. We do also have Field of Ruin, and that's something, but a little slow on the draw. Then we'll go ahead and draw Fulminator Mage. We're again just playing reactively here, passing. We're starting to take beats from Reshaper, but fortunately they did not make turn 3 Tron. We draw another Field of Ruin, so we're starting to line up a pretty tasty land destruction plan, and we've been very lucky that they haven't really managed to put together anything quicker than this. So we'll play Fulminator. On our end step, they're going to put a counter on Blast Zone, which we don't care about yet, and we'll destroy the Eldrazi Temple. because they clearly don't have any other Tron lands if they ran out this other stuff first, but they do top deck one, so they top deck Power Plant, they play Relic, and they keep the beat train going. Once again, we are just flooding like absolute crazy. Again, a loose keep on my part, there's no real getting around that, but at the same time, you'd hope we could draw a little bit of action, right? Instead, we're just drawing lands. So, draw step, we field the Power Plant. Opponent will float mana, they'll very efficiently get Once Upon a Time into Sundering Titan. This is actually, strangely enough, something that was on my radar, because I saw it recently. And I actually played turn 1 Blooming Marsh instead of just the Tomb tapped, because I had the silly idea, like, maybe we'll play around Sundering Titan like that. But realistically, we're gonna have to play Swamps and Forest at some point, right? Anyway, kind of funny that this super corner case thing occurred to me, and then they actually have it in the deck. I have, again, seen it recently as well. So we draw Dark Confidant. Again, our draws continue to be pretty poor. But they haven't done anything scarier than the Reshaper. But the Reshaper clock is beginning to add up. Let's go for Field of Ruin here on the zone, but they have Spatial Contortion. We, of course, didn't want them to untap and have enough mana to activate Blast Zone, but they had the kill for Bob anyway. Whatever, we're kind of probably trading him off with Reshaper anyway. So, not good, but again, we just kind of want to fade the bombs, but they Once Upon a Time for the third time into an Urza's Tower. So, they're starting to rebuild Tron, and the Reshaper continues pressuring us. Liliana of the Veil is a pretty good draw here. It's one of the things that can not be value negative necessarily while dealing with Reshaper, and I play Swamp so I can hold up a hard cast Force of Despair here. Unfortunately, Reshaper's Death Trigger yields Power Plant, which of course is the missing Tron piece. So, kind of expected the opponent to crack Relic there, just looking for the most action on the turn they're about to have Tron. But they don't, they just go to their turn, and here comes the big old Sundering Titan. We do have the ability to answer it with Force of Despair. Only minor problem is it's going to quadruple Stone Rain us when it enters the field, and when it leaves the field, it's going to destroy a swamp and a forest. So there you go. If only we had all Blooming Marshes, right? That's what I was thinking earlier, but Sundering Titan just kind of getting us here. Amusingly enough, we are still relatively functional after that. We get an Expedition map out of their hands, so they only have one unknown. And we get to deploy a creature land and a Hex Drinker. We can maybe cast Maelstrom Pulse next turn. So, all things considered, our Liliana's back on 2. It's really not the worst. OP will now unstep crack the Relic. And then they have another big old bomb, which is actually 2 big old bombs, double Reality Smasher for 10 mana, just ending the game. So, you know what? What are you going to do when we keep a hand that's pretty slow like that, leaning all in on the disruption of the lands, drawing a little bit more of that but not much else, and then the opponent's Reality Smasher plus their Once Upon a Times let them get Tron and have 3 really payoffs for assembling Tron that they would not really have been able to do otherwise. It's all a little bit rough, but hey, that's what Eldrazi Tron does. I could definitely see an argument that I'm supposed to mulligan that hand away, but again, I'm trying to play Force of Despair. I'm trying to see Force as often and as early as possible. Didn't pay off that time, but it wasn't Force's fault. Force was okay. And hey, imagine having a Force in hand on this turn. Things have gone a little bit differently. Imagine forcing away double Reality Smasher off of their 10 mana turn. That'd be pretty cool, right? But it was not to be, so we've got to go to game 3 and see what we can do on the play. Alright guys, so this hand also does not disrupt as well as we would like. Even though we side out some discard, we want to open on a copy. But I think this hand is good enough, because Field is much better on the play than it is on the draw, and we can also enable push with Field, and perhaps more importantly, it has a really good clock. Turn 2 Goyf into turn 4 Beast, these are 2 of our very best clockers. We've drawn another Field of Ruin, so, if that angle is live, it's going to be really live. Opponent did nothing T1, and then they go Temple T2 into our old nemesis, the Matter Reshaper. It is back to us. Once again, we're flooding out. We've drawn only lands so far. It's not good, but we're going with plan A, which is field them, push them and beat them. So Goyf becomes a 3/4, and the Reshaper Death Trigger gives them a Karn Liberated. So it's not the worst. We kind of want them to have found a high curve payoff there. They do, however, have a Relic, which is going to potentially keep Goyf down. However, we've drawn Trophy, and that's a fine one alongside our normal plan, but for this turn, we could go Field and Trophy, and that'd be okay, but I think we're fairly safe, although there are some things that punish us, to go QB. We just gotta start laying the beats down, gotta end the game as quickly as possible. Opponent will take the damage, and then end step, they will make an Eldrazi Scion token off of Warping Wail, and then they will play Karn the Great Creator, who will tick down and find them an Ensnaring Bridge, so they are on the back foot for sure. And we draw Scavenging Ooze, which is okay. Not really what we wanted to see here, but we do have the luxury of not having to do anything to get our damage across and answer the Walker at the same time, because QB is OP, cannot be blocked by Dorks. The Tarmogoyf, however, can. An opponent will chump the Goyf and then cash in the Scion to cash in the Relic. So Goyf back down to a 0/1, but QB, of course, putting the OP to 7, tagging Karn at the same time. You love to see it. Then we're going to go main phase Field of Ruin, hitting Eldrazi Temple because they're only on 1 Tron land. I'd rather make their plays less efficient than worry about Tron because we're threatening lethal right now. We go Field into Skoos, and we pass. Opponent has a Forest and a Waste, so they find Urza's Mines, so now they've got 2 Tron lands, but they play Ensnaring Bridge, and they follow it up with Walking Ballista, so we have Trophy to answer Bridge. If they didn't have an answer there, they would have been dead. We draw Field of Ruin, so we are seeing, what is this? Yeah, we saw all 3 fields. On the play by turn 6, obviously there's a lot to be said for that. That is pretty nice. So we're going to kick things off by trophying the bridge. They do not have a 3rd basic to fetch, so we might as well just main phase Field their most recent Tron land, and then we get to turn them all sideways. Sadly, there is no creature to eat, so we don't have lethal, but we do put them to 1, and they probably only have 1 copy of Ensnaring Bridge in the whole 75, so I don't know what else they can have on only 4 mana, maybe up to 5, and whatever they drew it was not good enough. No Worm Coil Engine this turn, no All Is Dust this turn. There wasn't really anything I was afraid of. Again, no follow-up Ensnaring Bridge, so nothing I could think of really had us cold there, and QB. Obviously, Tarmogoyf on the play, really nice too, getting us going, but QB was really, really nice to turn the corner as quickly as possible. Whenever you're attacking through a Dork and killing a Planeswalker while pressuring their life total, you realize just how good this card is. That's why I like to bring it in the matchups where the aggro side of things really does matter. This is an underrated thing about Questing Beast, how well it performs against aggro decks and against decks that play, that go a little bit above us a lot of the time, like Eldrazi Tron. So anyway, guys, Eldrazi Tron, arguably still my most hated deck of the modern format. You hate to run into it, but you love to take him down. We are 2-0 with Force of Rock. We have Forced of Despaired the opponent in both rounds so far. Long may it continue. I will see you for round 3. And here we are on the play, my friends. It's another Force of Despair hand. I love how much we are seeing this card, but it is a 1-lander. It's a slightly clunky one. You could say, well, we've got Turn Inquisition, and we can pitch one of these black cards to force. So I don't think it's the most unreasonable keep ever, but the 1 land is really just enough for me to want to take our first mulligan of the league here. And we mulligan to a 6 that looks painful, but otherwise pretty good. So to that end, bottoming one of the peat lands seems correct to me. I don't think we can realistically operate in most matchups off of 2 peat lands and a Treetop Village, so I'd rather just bottom that, keep all my gas in hand, and try to draw a 3rd non-peat land, right? So we go Treetop Village pass. We're against another Once Upon a Time deck. They will find Devoted Druid, then play Temple Garden, tapped, and pass. So this is some kind of Devoted Druid combo. Could be Devoted Devastation, could be the Heliod combo, could be green-white, could be Abzan. There's a few different variants floating around here, but we are very, very happy that they did not play a turn 1 creature, because that means we get to pretty freely tap out for Bob, and then hopefully untap and just curve out and take over. OP goes Swamp into Devoted Druid, so Abzan confirmed, and Bob will flip Trophy, and then we draw the third land off of draw step, so Bob letting us curve out, doing it more painfully than we'd like, but we'll take it. I go Liliana Edict here. I think getting Liliana online is correct. Push into Goyf would be okay. It's just kind of taking a different route. But I don't know how good like Hex Drinker is going to be, for example, so getting the Liliana down and then starting to tick up, tick down again, that's the game we'd like to play. Opponent has a good value play, though. They're keeping pace with a Witness buying back a fetch land. When they do that, it's a pretty much a red flag for Collected Company, if you ask me. And awkwardly enough, Bob flips Force of Despair, which starting to get real painful, Bob, and also just revealing our secret tech. You hate to see that. But we continue the attrition plan. Liliana will tick up, we'll lose a Bob, and we get Duskwatch Recruiter out of the opponent's hand. And then my plan here is to tap out. We're just going to really develop our board. So to that end, I don't mind this attack, because offering the trade, again, like, Bob is just starting to get pretty painful here. I don't mind that. They do play a pretty reasonable value game, and I don't mind them taking the damage either, because we do need to assume the role of aggressor even when we're behind in this matchup, because we can just die to their combo. So opponent indeed plays the fourth land and passes, so the read for Coco is pretty correct. We draw fourth land. Now we have a lot of incentives to keep this. We've got 3 mana sinks on field, and generally just like playing lands to empty the hand out as fast as you can with Liliana around is what you want to do. Nevertheless, we also have 3 reactive kill spells in hand, and I do decide to lean into those a little bit more. I also decide to attack because we do have the luxury of Force of Despair or just push Trophy, whichever we see fit, whether they do it in, before it blocks to try to get a kill on Hex Drinker, or whether they do it on the end step like they're going to. Either way, with 3 instants in hand, we can afford to play this way. Indeed, opponent will wait till the end step for the Coco, and annoyingly enough, they find 2 creatures that are going to get value off of dying, a Sphinx and a Viscerous Seer, but we will hardcast a Force, so it's still basically a 2-for-1 in our favor, even though they get the Scry value, and then they get the Persisted Sphinx bought back. That's about as cleanly as we could hope to answer a company like that at that type of spot, though. So if we didn't have Force of Despair, not only would we have a much less efficient way to try to battle through those with more traditional means like push and trophy, we also might not have had the luxury of attacking there, right? So Force of Despair actually looking really good there, despite them finding really good stuff off of their Cocos. And indeed, they untap, they play another Collected Company in their own upkeep, which is interesting, and they find Eternal Witness Noble Hierarch, so no combo shenanigans, just pure value. And of course, Ewit buys back the Coco, so we're in for our 3rd Coco of the game next turn. It's a little bit rough. Hierarch also gives Sphinx Exalted, which lets them take care of Liliana. They play a land tapped, and it is back to us. We draw another Trophy. Actually pretty good if you ask me. Like, obviously there are more efficient kill spells, but at this stage, any kill spell is fine. I am going to do this. We attack with the Goyf. Again, you can't get too scared to keep aggroing them out. Yes, they've regained some life. Yes, they're going to gain some more. But we've got to keep the pressure on. We've got to keep their life total low. And I'm going to leave Hex Drinker back, because realistically, we're never tapping out. It's just Savannah Lions mode from here on out for good old Snake. Speaking of snakes, opponent will play the Snake God, Ronus the Indomitable. And then they'll attack. They will go ahead and get the Exalted trigger, just a solo attack. Again, I'm happy to trade off my Savannah Lions there. Is it advantageous, really? No. But it's a fine trade-off at this stage. Also enables Revolt, so we get to Fatal Push the Kitchen Sphinx, which I am interested in doing. We're going to sandbag these trophies for a more appealing target than Noble Hierarch, and right now, Hierarch is not sufficient to allow them to block, so we get to attack with Goyf. We've got him on a 2-turn clock. Drawing the 4th land is actually pretty good here. Not only do we have the mana sinks, we've got two mana instants in hand, so Unfortunately, end step, we know what's coming. It's that third collected company. But this one is a bit of a break. It only hits Vizier of Remedies. Really, really nice for them to finally have a non-value positive collected company. And they're going to go on the Rona's plan, buffing Vizier, trying to attack with both, put us to 1, which would lock us out of a lot of plays between this Peat land and our fetch land, but of course, in the beginning of combat, we get to trophy away Vizier, which makes Ronas once again unable to attack or block. So Ronas definitely very conditional card. It's can be okay on a value access, but really it's a combo alternate win condition first for the infinite mana, and only a reasonable value play and attrition as a distant second, and you're seeing exactly why. Opponent will play another Vizier end step. We're going to trophy that away too, just keeping the board clear. And they only have 4 basics. Good to note, they didn't find one there. We draw Field of Ruin. So what do we want to do here? Do we want to field them, fix our mana, stone rain them a little bit? That's okay, but I actually decided to use Field to cash in Peatland, specifically in case I was thinking we'd draw Liliana of the Veil, to be perfectly honest. She was what was on my radar, wanting to keep double black and Treetop Village up, even though the stuff doesn't work well together. We cannot animate Treetop this way. But Force of Despair is another reason to have done that, so you love to see that. Force of Despair, very, very nice. Here, of course, we can hard cast it. We don't need to pitch anything. We force the chump block out of Noble Hierarch. OP draws yet another Vizier. They play Gavany Township. Our poor opponent spent a lot of time in the tank here trying to sequence, figure out whether it's better to attack, whether it's better to stay back, how to sequence. As soon as we got priority, we just put them out of their misery by showing them the Force of Despair, killing the Vizier, so the game's over, but the opponent makes us click the attack button, so that's what we do. Tarmogoyf crashing in for lethal here, and if we didn't quite have lethal, we could have fielded the Gavany Township and fixed our mana, deployed another Tarmogoyf, and had Treetop Village ready for next turn, so we would have been in a pretty good position anyway, with them hellbent. But we didn't need to. We get in for Exaxes, which just goes to show you the power of maintaining that aggressive stance, saying realistically, can I get the attack in this turn? Can I get the attack in, especially with a big Tarmogoyf that attacks well into their board and takes big chunks out of their life total. So guys, we mulliganed. The opponent had triple collected company. We didn't have like an amazing curve out, but we had a few things going for us. We did the luxury of being able to play Bob turn 2 on the play. That was huge. The fact that we were on the play, the fact that we had the Bob, the fact that they did not present a 1-drop creature, all those things allowed us to smooth out our early curve. And the other thing we had really going for us more than anything else, I think, was these Forces of Despair. They were honestly really, really useful here. Definitely a big performance thus far from the card, and we are only halfway through the league. So taking game 1 off of a Devoted Druid deck feels good. We have a lot of things to do post-side. Let's check them out. Alright guys, we have a ton to do in this matchup, so much so that I actually sideboarded out some pretty reasonable cards here, but I think what we brought in is a little bit better overall. We sided in 1 copy each of the following: Nile Spellbomb, Grafdigger's Cage, Engineered Explosives, Maelstrom Pulse, Kitchen Finks, which is arguably the most borderline card there, but I do think it's definitely quite reasonable, and we also brought in 2 copies of Plague Engineer. Had to refer back to my list. There are also 1 copy of Collective Brutality. That's the one I was forgetting. That is the 8th card that comes in. So again, another like non-obvious sideboarding decision, but here it's because too many of our cards are too good, basically, right? So to that end, we do trim away a little bit on discard, just answering the board a little bit more. Discard's still good, but answering the board and not having too many dead top decks is probably more where we want to be. 2 copies of Lily of the Veil, she's pretty good too, but against the Kitchen Finks build and on the draw, she does get worse in both of those regards. Unearth is a reactive card, conditional card we're pretty happy to cut. 1 copy of Hexdrinker and Tireless Tracker, just because the mana sinks that don't stabilize our life total are a little bit worse, I think, than Scavenging Ooze, especially because they do play those graveyard effects like Kitchen Finks and Eternal Witness, so that we want to disrupt. Finally, I don't know if I've ever done this before, but I do sideboard out a copy of Tarmogoyf here just because we have so many ways to control the board, so many ways to generate value. I'm a little bit more interested in X for ones than in the pure beats, just trimming away a Tarmogoyf, that's all. It's a little bit more experimental, but we're playing an experimental list, and I think alongside Force of Despair, it makes more sense to lean more into the other things that we've done. Anyway, we have a pretty solid hand on the draw. Obviously, it's a little slow, but this turn 1 Fatal Push is really the linchpin of it, and we have some really nice value plays from there on out. We just want to keep gassing out, but drawing another land, not really going to do it. But taking care of that turn 1 Giver, pretty nice. Just kind of a mandatory piece to kill under most circumstances, especially early on. And unfortunately, opponent has the turn 2 Devoted Druid, and there's nothing we can do about it besides, once again, put our faith in Bob. Hope they don't have the combo here. Hope they don't just go off, or even just get like a really good value turn while we have nothing to say about it. So, opponent just going to main phase a Collected Company, looking for exactly those things. But another somewhat of a brick. Kitchen Finks is a good value find, but that is the only find, so pretty lucky for us. Opponent will then untap Devoted Druid, making it a -1/1 to play Shaper Sanctuary, so despite the semi-brick on Coco, this was a really good turn 3 for them, but I am actually very happy that they did that, because of course, that's going to make the Plague Man very, very happy. Now, Plague Man naming Druid is pretty good here because it's going to kill this Devoted Druid, and it's also going to hose Noble Hierarch, so naming Druid is actually pretty reasonable here. But we also drew Engineered Explosives. EE on 1 takes care of Sanctuary and can clean up a lot of their other things, but Thoughtseize, I believe, is the card they know about here. And obviously Thoughtseizing here is pretty tempting too. They could have another company, and the Thoughtseize could become dead in short order. So definitely a judgment call here, but in the end I opted for the guaranteed value of Plague Engineer, taking away the Mana Dork, and then we'll kind of take it from there. Opponent plays out a land, plays out a Birds of Paradise, and the speed with which they did all this kind of led me to believe they don't have another they only have another land in hand. That was my read here, so I'm not that inclined to Thoughtseize, and we draw another Thoughtseize, and once again, Bob revealing all of our secret tech here by flipping Force of Despair. Very painful stuff, so it's all becoming a little bit clunky. We're drawing some kind of dead cards, we're drawing kind of painfully, but, you know, we're still on the main plan, which was Bob into Kalidas, and Plague Engineer showed up along the way, so this gives us really good attacks. And unless their last card or their play off the top is a Path to Exile for Kalidas, I'm actually feeling really confident here. So opponent will fetch, they will Once Upon a Time, and whatever they found is not sufficient. They are just simply scooping it up. So we were about to have a really nice turn coming up, of course. Kind of no matter what they did, we had a lot of things that don't target, making this Shaper Sanctuary just not that good. Force of Despair pitching a Thoughtseize is super free, even if they only play just one creature this turn of whatever variety. EE could 2-for-1 them, taking care of birds, taking care of Shaper Sanctuary, and making us a zombie for good measure. We had all kinds of stuff going on. We're drawing 2 cards per turn. We've got Plague Man hosing Druids. We've got a redraw off our land for Flood Insurance. And we've got Kalidas snowballing the game. So you can see why we sideboard a little bit out of cards like Tarmogoyf and Liliana of the Veil, if you have enough to do. Again, those cards are totally fine here, but especially on the draw, when you want to be more efficient with your disruption, and more disruption-oriented, less aggro-oriented. If you have a list like this, guys, you have a lot to do. Don't be afraid to trim away a little bit on the staples to shoehorn in more cards, because our disruption can be really, really oppressive against a deck like this, and we just kind of crushed him here in Game 2. So we're cruising the league, my friends. It is 3-0. Cashed the Force of Rock debut, and let's see what we can do in the final 2 rounds. Hope you're enjoying this one, Ian, and hope the rest of you are enjoying this as well. Well, it is round 4, my friends, and Force of Despair just won't be denied. This card is showing up everywhere for us, and again, this is exactly what we set out to do. With these donation leagues, whether they're replay or live recorded, I basically never play multiples. I think there was one time with an early Jund league where one of my first ever donation leagues where I just could not get a league that was good content. It was just, I was going 3-2, but they were all non-games on both sides, so I had to do that a few times to get a good one for the donor. But otherwise, I do one take, and I hope it's good. And that's what's going on here, so I'm not cherry-picking the league with the most Force of Despair. This is just the only time I played Force of Rock, and we're seeing it every time. Gotta love it. So they go turn 1 Swifty, I go turn 1 Force It. I think with our hand, we just gotta slow them down, so we are against either Burn or Prowess here, and we are trying to survive long enough to get on the Liliana plan. But we are a few turns away from that. Opponent will go Swifty number 2 into Bauble. So this is the Bauble Prowess build, not to be confused with the Steamkin build. And it's a really good turn. They go hit us for 2, and then light up the stage, getting a 1-mana draw 2, finding the 3rd land in a Lava Dart. It is all pretty nice. And then, of course, they're going to upkeep Bauble us, so they know about a land, and they don't quite maybe know how flooded we are, but we sure are. We'll play Blooming Marsh. We will pass. Opponent will kick things off with Monomorphose into another Monomorphose, into a Mishra's Bauble. Lots of just free spells. The Bauble build is definitely really cool. They cast the Lava Dart from exile, putting themselves with that Swifty to 5/6. I'm going to wait till the last possible moment. Of course, I want to let them spend every spell they have. And indeed, they decide to shove all in here. So Lava Dart, it will be flashed back, sacking a mountain. I still wait, because they receive priority before we do in the declare blockers phase, and then they shove all in with their last piece of mana, so then, with that on the stack, we do finally trophy them. So instead of taking 7, from the creature, it's just dead, which is really nice. They've only got 2 cards left in hand. Sadly, we are just purely flooded, but if we're going to be flooded, we might as well have a Liliana on curve. That's what we've got. And we get another mountain out of their hand. They will Bauble, and then they're looking for more action. They're going to Lava Spike Liliana. And here I was hoping that they were just going to double spell to take care of Liliana, then it's a top deck war. Instead, it's much worse. They Lava Spike, and then they play Bedlam Reveler. So that's about as perfect as it could get for the opponent. And we're in some trouble here, especially because we cannot Edict. We draw Inquisition. That's fine if we have other things to do here, but we just don't. So we get the only spell out of their hand, which is a Light Up the Stage. Pretty nice. And then we're going to take up. They're going to lose that mountain. They've got the Canopy land as a redraw. We've got our own Canopy land. We'll play it. We'll say go. We're going to lose the Liliana here to the Bedlam Reveler. They'll crack Canyon. They'll smack Liliana. We'll cantrip into a Thoughtseize, we'll draw a Fatal Push. So wrong half of the deck problem. Honestly, though, Thoughtseizing here is pretty good for a couple of different reasons. They could be slow-rolling instants. Like, worst case scenario, the 2 life that you lost is potentially made up for by them not getting those 2 Prowess triggers on Reveler. They didn't need them last turn because, of course, they were attacking the Liliana. So yeah, that's exactly what happens. They have a Monomorphose in response, so this is a great time to have forced a Monomorphose out of their hand. Obviously, this isn't ideal. We wish we just drew another Liliana, but hey, they Monomorphosed into a creature, so we get it out of there. It's pretty decent stuff, all things considered, and they just have another mountain in hand, so they are still top-decking. We do still have a shot here. We've just got to draw something good. Their top deck, though, is Lava Spike. That's an incredibly good draw. That puts us to 4 in combination with the attack. And we draw Treetop Village. Yeah, not going to do it. We're going to play it out, though, because we're not technically dead yet. Maybe they'll break again. Looks like they did. They put us to 1. We draw an Inquisition. Inquisition just sees another mountain. There's no reason not to cast it there, but we kind of figured it would, of course, brick. And opponent just slugging away with the Bedlam Reveler here. We're going to fire up Treetop Village. chump block and still try to stick in the game, but against the Lava Dart deck, staying at 1's not very good, and we brick yet again with another Inquisition. We'll Inquisition for information, and just to show the opponent how discard flooded we were, and then we scoop it up. Just cannot defeat that Bedlam Reveler. So you notice how we do trim away a little bit of discard in this matchup. Again, this can be grindy. It can be very grindy, very mid-rangey. We, in the crucial stage of the game, they found a Bedlam Reveler at the crucial stage of the game, and after the Reveler answered our Liliana, we found discard, kill spell that doesn't work, discard, land, discard. Pretty, so 5 dead draws in a row. You're not going to beat Bedlam Reveler like that. But you can see why trimming away a little bit of discard is live in this matchup. Even though Inquisition seems like a free roll, if you want to play 2 Inquisition, 1 Thoughtseize post side, I think that's totally fine. You have to trim an Inquisition to do that. Again, it depends on your 75, and we covered the sideboarding more in depth already, so I'll stop talking about it now. But this was, you can just see, maybe get a little bit more feel for how the matchup can play out. But anyway, they got us game 1. Let's go check out game 2. Alright guys, so we've got a pretty good 60 post side against Mono Red Prowess. I think we're firmly favored, and to that end, I don't want to keep a hand that only has 2 spells, especially when both spells are slow and kind of non-bow with each other. Like, if we had a more conditional black card in hand, you could see Force being just like what we lean all in on, or if we had a card that was good in a standalone way in the early turns, we could say we've got that, plus we've got the Liliana follow-up, and then maybe you keep it, but even then a 5-lander is kind of loose in this matchup, again, post-side when we have such a good configuration. We mull to, honestly, a pretty bad 6, but, this is value-oriented. I do decide to keep it. We've got 2 pretty serious cards, if and only if we can draw Disruption. So I just run out Hexdrinker there. This is going to hopefully force them to deal with it in some capacity. If they don't deal with it in some capacity, I'm happy just spending early turns sinking mana into it and trying. We don't want to play the Scoos anytime soon anyway. And sure enough, they go turn 1 Lava Dart. We're just really hoping we draw interaction here. I think, hoping to draw interaction, using the Hexdrinker as a 1-for-1, and leaning on Scoos here is probably better than going to 5. So that's our plan. So far, we haven't managed to draw interaction, but the game is still young. Opponent going off with some Monomorphos Eye, and then they just have no follow-up. So this is really, really good for us. The only way it's not good is that we suspect Bedlam Reveler is in the offing, but we do have Scavenging Ooze to maybe start working on the graveyard. But for now, Liliana is the play. I would rather do that here while they're tapped out, while we have a Field of Ruin to pretty freely pitch here. And then it's back over to the OP. They go Mountain into Blood Moon. So a moment of silence for us here. We are totally and completely hosed as things stand by the Blood Moon. I just got to go on a tangent about this. Ryan Overturf is the Prowess player, if you ask me, and if you ask most people. He created the deck, he streams it a lot, he's a very, very good player, very knowledgeable player. Ryan is adamant that Blood Moon should definitely not come in, even against fair decks that are a lot softer to it than Rock. So it should not come in against Shadow. It should not come in against, Abzin, 3-color BGX that doesn't even play red. Shouldn't even come in those matchups, so you can imagine that it's even more true from his perspective, and from mine, that it should not come in against BG the Rock, because the thing about Blood Moon is we have every incentive possible to keep lands with basic hands and to fetch for basics when we can already. Blood Moon does not give us a tension between do we get our shock lands or do we get our basic lands. They're a hyper aggro deck we already want to fetch the basics. So Blood Moon, not very good, in my humble opinion, and I'm not just saying that because it hosed us here. That is my objective take on it, but we're going to hit play here, and, we're just going to say, hopefully they don't have an answer to Liliana, and hopefully we do draw one of our 2 basic forests specifically. We can also, of course, draw Swamp. Remember, opponent had nothing to do off of the Monomorphos Eye, so they could have kept a hand just on the strength of Blood Moon, but they do light up the stage into land Swifty, which is pretty rough, so they get to pressure Liliana, they flash back the Lava Dart. I just decide to cash in the Liliana and again extend the game, hope they don't really have anything. Realistically, Liliana's dying next turn almost no matter what unless they have total bricks in hand. But they light up into a Soul Scar, so their hand is slow, it's clunky, but they're continuing to do it while we're totally locked out. Nile Spellbomb is a card that we can play, and I do it. I just play it and I instantly crack it. Just keeping them off of Reveler, again, extending the game here. That's all we can do. Try to draw our basic lands. Opponent finds another Soulscar Mage, though. So they're going wide. We draw Dead Fatal Push. It is back to them. They attack. We got nothing. We draw another Dead Fatal Push. Very, very tilting. Back over to the OP, and then for 7 mana, they tap out for a Bedlam Reveler. So just total insanity. This is a progression that we would basically never lose to if we weren't just mooned out, given what we've drawn, you know. Again, I've made the case against Blood Moon. The one case for it is if you think on Prowess, like maybe they don't have any other cards to bring in against us. Maybe for some reason they're not packing Dismember, they're not packing any value-oriented 2-for-1s like Shrine of Burning Rage or Bone Crusher Giant or other things like this. So maybe they just say, well, our matchup's pretty bad, I'm going to try to cheese them out with Blood Moon. I still don't think that's correct, but that would be like the main argument I could see in favor of trying it. But if you're going to do that, it should probably only be a one of, and it should probably only be on the play as well. Unfortunately for us, we just had to mulligan. We kept a 6 that was soft to it. We didn't see any fetch lands, and we just automatically lost to the Blood Moon, which I don't think is correct to do. But anyway, I'm not shading the opponent here. I love Mono Red Prowess. It's a deck I'm happy to lose to if I have to lose a game. And they sure did put us to the sword here. And they, hey, fair and square, ground us out game 1. And then Blood Moon here did offer a dimension of hate that we were unable to survive. So, feels bad, my friends. No 5-0 for Force of Rock, but we're still doing really well in the league. We're 3-1, playing for that 4-1. I will see you in the final round. Here we are for that round 5, guys, and Force of Despair has been in almost every Game 1 opening hand we've had. What a great 5 games for this card. This is a perfectly reasonable keep in a blind Game 1. We have again lost the die roll. Losing a lot of die rolls this time around, and the opponent, we're seeing a lot of basic mountain decks, and I have to say, we're seeing a lot of really nice choices from the basic lands. This is a beautiful one. Love to see that. So I run out Verdant Catacombs here because a basic mountain pass has got me a little bit suspicious for Mono Red Prison. Maybe that's just because I got mooned out of the game more than anything else, but indeed, I am playing around Blood Moon here to the point where I don't even crack that on the end step, and I'm just going to double down on this play, you know, we're just going to run out our fetch lands and say go, because I'm scared of the Blood Moon here, I don't want to automatically lose to it yet again, especially because they do nothing for another turn in a row. But opponent goes turn 3, a hard cast light up the stage into Soulscar and Monomorphose, so it's just a Prowess player that kept a really slow hand. So to that end, I am cool fetching at least one basic, or at least one non-basic, but realistically, let's hope the Prowess players out there are not main decking Blood Moon, so we just get both of our tombs painlessly. And then we draw Liliana the Veil, which is actually a really good draw here. That's the type of thing we want to do. Again, like we saw in previous matchups, while they're tapped out, while their board is clear, start working on the hand. Save Tracker for going Tracker into land into Fatal Push, potentially. Opponent is on a Runaway Steamkin build, so they go Steamkin into Monomorphose here. And this could be a really explosive turn for them, but remember, we are sitting on Force of Despair. So if we wanted to stop them from like having the extra mana this turn, because when this trigger resolves after they cast Lava Dart, they're going to get the 3rd counter on Steamkin, then they can remove it, they can have more spells. Honestly, I don't care. If we cared, we would have maybe forced them in response to the 2nd spell. But because of that, because we don't care, we're just going to let it happen, because we want them to play out into Force as much as possible, and we know they have at least this Soulscar Mage to play. So to that end, we just let them do their thing, we let them go off, and hey, it's a really good, you know, they dart and to light up the stage, they find another Runaway Steamkin, and they're going to play that one out, and then they're going to play the Soulscar Mage out, so you can see how Runaway Steamkin enables these really explosive turns. But But, my friends, you know what answers it really well is this card, Force of Despair. So we let them move to beginning of combat, and then we 3 for 2 them by forcing their board and really just unwinding all of the great work that they've done. We draw we draw Kalitas Trader of Get, which is an amazing draw. You could even see, like, going Tracker into land this turn and then Kalitas next turn. That would actually be pretty interesting if we were not on Liliana +1 plan. But because we are, I do decide to just pitch the Tracker, slam the Kalitas, say go. We get another one of those beautiful basic mountains out of their hand. Opponent will play Sunbait Canyon from Exile, they'll crack it, and then they're just going to scoop it up. So presumably they were in the market for Bedlam Reveler. Even Reveler, I think realistically we're going to beat here with the Liliana Edict, the Kalitas value, and a Brutality in hand, plus our top deck, plus the Flood Insurance of Peatland. I don't see us losing, but presumably opponent did not even have that first Reveler to start trying to make a game of it. So guys, Force of Despair, looking so awesome here. Just another really great use case for the card. Now, I don't think, based on this sample size, we can say that we quote-unquote should be playing this card. But I do want to say that this is a really good display for it thus far, and we get a really dominating win here in Game 1 over Mono Red Prowess. We've talked about sideboarding enough, let's just go straight into Game 2. So we're making tweaks to sideboarding. Tracker's been out sometimes, in sometimes. In this case, it's in and we open on it, and partially due to the presence of Tracker, partially due to the lands, this is a bit of an awkward hand, but it's a keep. You know, it's on the draw. We have the room to draw a 4th land, and that's going to make a lot of things function better. More importantly, we do have Brutality, we do have Scoos. Opponent took a mulligan, down to 6, but they do lead on turn 1 Swifty, and we have Plague Engineer. So they kind of have free reign here to do a lot of good stuff. They're going to main phase a Burst Lightning, and then they're just going to pass. So thankfully there was no light up the stage. Would have been really bad to get Burst Lightning, then they could have lit up main phase and then hit us for 3. That would have been pretty rough, plus of course drawing 2. However, the fact that they did that, but they didn't shove any further in, this leads me to believe they are playing around Collective Brutality. So to that end, I do decide not to fire off their Brutality, because again, we do have Trophy to hold up. Now, obviously, turn 2 Brutality is way better than turn 3 Trophy, but if you have reason to believe they're playing around Brutality, I don't think you should force it. Especially when we've got a good hand, we don't necessarily have bad cards to pitch. We kind of want to stay flush with resources, so to that end, we do just lean on the Trophy here. We let them make the first move, they don't, so I'll just Trophy it, rather not take the 1. And we definitely don't want to time walk ourselves here, right? So Runaway Steamkin, passing, holding up 2 cards and 1 mana. We draw Fatal Push. So Plague Engineer naming Elemental for Runaway Steamkin would be live if they were tapped out, but they can outsize it with an instant, and the instant could also kill Plague Engineer, then they could just go off next turn. So we could actually just go Fatal Push, pass, but you know what they can't really play around unless they want to Stone Rain themselves with this Lava Dart is Collective Brutality, so now is a good time to force that action. We go full escalation. I decide that it's time to abandon the Tracker plan, so we pitch Tracker and Field of Ruin. We've still got a lot of good value and good interaction in hand, and again, to survive this, they might have to Lava Dart at a less than ideal time, and I think that is totally fine. So, yep, sure enough, the only downside, though, for us is that we whiff with the Brutality and they have a Reveler in hand, which is a little bit scary, but at the same time, that is providing them with a lose-lose situation in one way. Like, they either want to cash in the Dart to make this thing live, but that gets them that much further away from Reveler in 2 ways, because they Stone Rain themselves, and they lose a spell out of the graveyard, so they only have 2 instants and sorceries left in there. They can make mana with Steamkin perhaps, but at the end of the day, we still have that Fatal Push in hand. That's why we kept it around. So after the dust settles, we push the Steamkin. We leave the Reveler pretty well stranded in hand. What we want to fade here is them just drawing Monomorphose Chain, basically. They draw a Canopy land instead. We draw Tarmogoyf. I think Tarmogoyf here is the better play than Scoos, specifically because we only have one green land, and also better than Plague Man. But we draw another Plague Man, so now it might be time to start running them out. But we'll show them the Tarmogoyf beats here. And then we will play another Plague Engineer. So naming Elemental is fine here. Naming Human is also fine. But right now I'm a little bit worried about them building up to Reveler mana via Steamkin. So I do just name Elemental. It's also a hard kill. Like, they will die to state-based effects before they get anything else going on. Whereas it just will shrink the humans, right? So back to the OP. They've been disciplined with the Canopy lands because, again, they're working toward Reveler. They want to keep lots of mana around. And they do hit Monomorphos, and then they dump out a couple humans. So, still got that Reveler in hand, but we've got another Plague Engineer in hand, and that's just the play here, I think. Shrinking the humans lets us attack with impunity this turn, and also just makes their board a little less scary for future turns. So we put them to 4. It's pretty nice. We are presenting lethal if they don't get to chump block. We want to fade this off the top, frankly, which is Monomorphos. Could lead to some really good stuff. But they Monomorphos into a land, and then they do tap out for Bedlam Reveler, so they refuel the hand, but they are down to 2. So if we can find a kill spell, they are just dead. And we do Assassin's Trophy off the top. Now, granted, that's kind of the worst kill spell because it could open up like them shocking a Plague Engineer here to stay alive, but they clearly didn't have an instant speed kill spell off of those 3 draws. And therefore, my friends, we do get there by presenting an aggressive board against mono-red Prowess. A good amount of disruption followed up by a nice wide board. We did have the predicted awkward mana situation proved to be the case. We never really made it too much less awkward, but just the natural size of Tarmogoyf and the debuff of Plague Engineer plus the Grey Ogre mode, it got us over the line. So we come out of this league 2-1 against my other archetype, mono-red Prowess, and 4-1 overall, only losing to a decision that I think, again, is incorrect of bringing in Blood Moon. Now, granted, it still would have been a close game in Game 2. We still would have needed to win Game 3, so even if they hadn't mooned us out, we were far, far from guaranteed the win. But I do think we're favored against Prowess. I think you can see that overall via this league, and let's do a wrap-up regarding the Force of Rock build presented to us by Ian Ray. Okay, my friends, so what do we think about Force of Rock? Well, here are my critiques of the deck, and they're very few. I think, again, Ian put together a really well-tuned list. It's well-suited to the meta, and it also leverages the strengths and weaknesses of Force of Despair in a really nice way. The one thing that I can't condone, even though he made a good argument for it, and even though a lot of people, frankly, agree with him more than they'd agree with me, I just mathematically don't think we want to play only 16 black sources in a rock list, and we, granted, did not get punished for it here, but it can happen, it will happen, and I just really don't think we want to put ourselves in a position to lose to our own deck in that regard. But there is a tipping point, right? There is a tipping point where you want to take a little bit more of a gamble to get more juice out of your mana base and take a few more risks that way. I understand that. I'm not saying it's never correct. I'm just saying right now, I don't think the second Treetop Village is quite enough to make me want to do that. So I will continue advocating a more conservative, a more consistent mana base. So that would be one of my critiques, but admittedly, again, one that didn't really happen here. The only other critique I really have here is that I just think Surgical Extraction, even though historically I was a big advocate for a very long time of like a 1-1-1 split of Surgical and Spellbomb and Cage, because they all do different things and they all flex into different matchups, and arguably drawing one of each is better than drawing multiples of the other. I still think the logic is sound, but right now I just don't feel Surgical to be very well positioned. The combo decks don't fold to Surgical anymore. The ones that see play all have multiple win conditions, especially the big mana decks have more win conditions than ever before, and as far as the graveyard decks go, They all basically right now demand that you clear out the whole graveyard or lock down the whole graveyard with things like Spellbomb and Cage rather than extracting one key piece most of the time. So the only thing I would really recommend, I like a lot of the other selections. Again, I think we've built around Kalitas really well. I think we've covered our bases really well with this deck. I would just prefer to see a second, probably Spellbomb, possibly Cage, in place of this extraction. Otherwise, I really like what you made here, Ian. I really like the fact that you brought Force of Despair back to everybody's attention, and I love that we just saw the card so often, and it was really reasonable a lot of the time. Now, granted, it was clunky some of the time. Like, I'm thinking of one or two hands that we kept that we couldn't keep, or that we did keep and got punished for it, where they were like 4 or 5 landers where one of the cards was Force. We just didn't have enough gas to pitch to it. So one thing that comes to mind, if it's otherwise well positioned in the meta, would be to play a 7th discard spell main deck, which is going to let us disrupt earlier with the number one thing we want to see overall, especially in blind game ones, which is discard spells, 1 mana targeted discard, and you're more likely rather to be able to turn these dead things into gas late game by pitching them to Forces of Despair. Just a thought, if you do want to consider anybody out there testing Force of Despair more often. I think considering the 7th discard spell alongside it is definitely something we'd want to do. You also see, in my view, a couple cards that could, like green cards that are fine, but you might want to try to find a black equivalent for them, again, if we are leaning more into Force. So I'm thinking we've got 2 Hex Drinkers, 1 Tireless Tracker, and 1 Questing Beast, and 1 Kitchen Finks, all for value slots. I think at least one of them could become Liliana the Last Hope. At least one of them could become Vraska Golgari Queen. Maybe we don't lean too far into that, but if we want to build around Force a little bit more, I think doing something like that, or comparing and seeing if we have that option, is a free roll and should be considered. Finally, I really like bringing back EE, but it is, again, another thing that is a little non-Bowie with our build. With 2 Hex Drinker, I think I'd rather see EE in a build that leaves Hex Drinker out and leans more into things like Tracker or QB. Also, of course, it's not black, you can't pitch it to Force, so 1 or 2 things we could tweak the levers on where we're kind of executing the same plan, finding cards that fit the same role, but they just had that slight bit more synergy with the Force of Despair package. But anyway, guys, those are my thoughts. You can, of course, feel free to share your thoughts on the build, on the sideboarding I showed you, on the gameplay, as always, and on the content in general. Guys, I've been bringing you as much content as is humanly possible in this month of February, and just generally post-New Year. Overall, I really hope you're enjoying it. If you are, of course, you know what to do. You can like, share, comment. You can please subscribe to the channel. And if you are able and willing, Patreon.com is the best way to give back to the content. You get rewards for doing so. All of that info in the description, of course, alongside patronizing my sponsor at BrianPalmerArt.com. I do get a bit of a kickback from that as well, so thanks again to everybody doing all of that. Thanks again to Ian, and maybe Force of Despair will be something that's kind of on the back burner for us. Again, if decks like that Vomit Out the Hand come back, if Affinity and Hollow One, whatever the next all into the board deck ends up being, we do have Force of Despair that we can reach for if we want to have an unusually effective tool in those matchups. I'm a little sad that we got mooned out. Would have been really cool to get published here with a 5-0 featuring Force of Despair, but maybe one of you will do that in the future. I thank you very much for watching. Stay tuned to the channel. More donation leagues, more modern mid-range, and more of the deck we faced 3 times this league, of course, Mono Red Prowess as well. I will talk to you soon, and hope everybody out there has a wonderful day.